All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the final student presentation for the Innovation Summit 2022. So I am pleased to introduce Major Emily Eckman, who is going to talk about something that relates to the last subject, MSO, and it specifically relates to how we work in the cognitive domain. So turn it over to you.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to be here. So the title of my work is The Fate of Truth and Disinformation. In my thesis, I focus on the 2016 presidential election. I chose my topic because it appears to me that we are not keeping pace within the disinformation domain. And this gray zone activity is certainly not going away anytime for the foreseeable future. We do have an organization that exists to counter disinformation known as the Global Engagement Center, the GEC. And what I propose is that we make this a permanent solution and also bring additional equities into the fold. I'm going to start out by hitting some important highlights from my findings. So the Mueller report revealed a lot of stuff, and I'm only going to go over a few things here. But I think the biggest thing was it revealed to Americans how vulnerable we are to social media attacks. Leading up to the election, Russia's Internet Research Agency ran a series of ads operations that drove users to like pages, follow Instagram accounts, join events, visit websites, and they captured browsing history on Facebook. The IRA established many platforms such as, but not limited to, Don't Shoot Us, United Muslims of America, Being Patriotic, Secured Borders, Blacktivists, and Confederate Rally. IRA also purchased political advertisements on social media in the name of U.S. personnel and entities, and they staged political rallies posing as grassroots organizations on American soil. Russia targeting the U.S. population is intentional because they understand in a Western democracy that we elect our leaders and broadly shape foreign policy and by extension, military intervention. Targeting the fault lines that exist and driving that wedge deeper is a tactic that erodes trust amongst citizens and their government and makes the truth less about the facts and more about belief. Russia understands this and exploits it. The Russian main intelligence directorate, otherwise known as a GRU, actually had access to the DNC for almost a year leading up to the 2016 election. Once the DNC became aware of this, GRU leaked email data to various outlets such as WikiLeaks, DC Leaks, Guccifer 2.0. Associated with the GRU is Active Persistent Threat 28, APT 28. And their activities also preceded the election by about 2 years. APT 28 used tools to prey on software applications such as Adobe Flash, Java, Windows. They obtained credentials through fabricated Google application authorization to bypass two-factor authentication. Now, our interagencies, as well as civilian cyber security companies, confirmed that Russia was also lobbying groups they felt would likely shape U.S. policy. They also targeted online voting systems, think tanks, and primary campaigns. And in fact, IRA reached over half the U.S. population, with disinformation being circulated more than the truth.
Impressive.
So just some key highlights about Russia I wanted to briefly mention is disinformation from Russia against the United States has actually existed since after World War II. And after the Cold War and the breakup of the Soviet Union, obviously Russia harbored a lot of resentment, but Russian disinformation didn't reach the level that it had until 2016. It was unprecedented. Putin, when he took office the first time in 2000, he actually used a top-down anti-American rhetoric that really amplified relations among societies. And probably most of us know he blames the US for color revolutions. He also looks at sanctions as a way for the West to incite regime change, even though it's our way to signal Russia that we are not happy with their behavior. Open web platforms, obviously rooted in free speech, however noble a cause, has created massive attack surfaces for authoritarians and dictators. And even though the decline of democracy does predate these platforms, it shouldn't be a surprise as to how useful they remain to governments that would seek to end democracy altogether. And, you can learn more about that. The democratic backsliding is not an issue I will dive down into, but there are definitely positive correlations there with disinformation. So let me talk about the Global Engagement Center briefly. The current policy for countering disinformation is a bill known as Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, which Congress set into law back in 2015, 2016. And it directs the Department of State to establish a center for analysis and response. And it's intended to coordinate efforts with both government agencies and also allow for grants in support of independent media in refuting disinformation. The GEC was established and pursuant to executive order in 2016, and it's designed to take advantage of talent within the private sector and the government. However, it's not clear, at least it wasn't clear to me in my studies, exactly who in the private sector they are aligned with, and that may be intentional. The GEC has 3 predecessors, and the GEC was due to receive increased funding. And again, I'm focusing on 2016 election from FY16 to FY17, going from 16 to 32 million. Section 1287 authorized more increased funding through a transfer of authority, but that was actually not mandated. Russia spent $146 million on influence operations in 2016, and our GDP is over 10 times theirs. So, if policymakers are serious about getting after disinformation, I believe that we need a permanent national office for information with appropriations from Congress. The GEC, I believe, is set to sunset in 2024. I imagine it will either remain or be replaced by something else. But I think replacing these organizations over and over again, we just need to, I believe that we need to come up with a permanent solution. So how should the U.S. posture to counter disinformation? So I'm certainly not the first to mention the importance of big tech working with government agencies. I do get a little more detailed. Some of what I propose may already exist. I do believe that the National Office for Information should have an executive headquarters that reports to the NSC. And I do believe that it ought to include L&Os from folks from the Department of State, Homeland Security, service IOs, big tech, RAND, Digital Forensics Research Lab, an organization akin to debunk.eu, and commercial cybersecurity and cyber intelligence companies. Now, debunk.eu is an interesting cadre of folks made up of geeks, elves, and journalists. The geeks use AI to scrape domains that are known for hosting disinformation. The elves monitor domains, and they report toxic trolls. They debunk false stories with evidence and provide this to professional journalists who disseminate to various news outlets. Big tech is obviously important because in countering disinformation, they are the linchpin for this. I mean, they can limit the reach of bad actors. RAND, or something akin to RAND, I think would be very beneficial to have in an organization like this, because they could potentially predict platforms that have yet to come online and maybe help them so they're not, so they don't fall victim to some of the same issues that our current platforms have with disinformation. Digital Forensics Research Lab could aid in holding hosts accountable, such as WikiLeaks, for spreading disinformation and helping with maybe individual sanctions. Now, I'm going to focus on civilian cyber intelligence companies a little bit. Obviously, bureaucracy and government oversight can sometimes make for a slow process because people are understandably cautious and maybe sometimes risk averse. Private companies, they don't have that congressional oversight, but they do have to abide by guidelines. The DOJ has put out, and I forget all the details about it, but it's basically how to collect to protect. So they still have guidelines, but they don't have the same bureaucracy. I'm going to talk about one company. I won't say the name just for security purposes, but there is one cyber intelligence company that actually works with federal law enforcement and the IC. The federal law enforcement was actually trying to track down a sexual predator for about 6 months. And within 3 days, the cyber intelligence companies was able to do attribution and find this person's whereabouts. And they are currently serving 75 years in prison. Another example is this same civilian cyber intelligence company was able to identify an adversarial nation state's covert cyber infrastructure, tap into it, and they are able to collect at will. And in turn, they share this information with federal law enforcement and the intelligence community. This company in particular is stacked with good people that believe in the government and they want to support it, if for nothing less, pennies on the dollar. They're an exemplar of a whole host of civilian cyber intelligence companies that are out there.
Okay.
So one of the questions that came up in my defense when I proposed this structure is funding. How do you fund this? And of course, that's not easy, right? Some models to potentially emulate would be the National Cyber Forensics and Training Alliance and also Bellingcat. They have a mix of both government and civilian equities. And I think the biggest thing with these two organizations is the desire is there. The desire is there to work together and combat disinformation. So hard nut to crack, yes, but it's possible. So when I initially did this thesis, I focused mostly on the national level, but of course, this can help the Fleet Marine Force and the Joint Force. The company I referenced earlier, they have unique data, not just because it's not always about the quantity of data, but quality. And this company I referenced earlier, they had unique data, and they actually focus their efforts on Iran, North Korea, China, and Russia. So that could be, hugely important for your analyst that can then inform collections who support the boots on the ground. This could also be helpful for unforeseeable situations. I was the last radio battalion detachment OIC in OEF 14.2. And when I was turning over, Snowden divulged a lot of classified information. It really upset President Hamid Karzai. And as a result, our collection efforts went down by about 50%. So obviously having the ability to use other resources for data that you need to continue to protecting the forces that are outside the wire is hugely important. My course last week, we spoke about plausible deniability. Russia pretends to be very good at this, but we all know that they're not. So, if the Department of Defense has certain actions that they want to take within the information domain or the cyber domain, but they're concerned with attribution, this is one way that civilian cyber companies could help. Such activities could be perceived at best as criminal and not necessarily an act of war. Now, of course, there's risks to implementing an organization like this. I would like to think it's a more robust organization, and it could increase fears that information warfare will be used to undermine Russia or maybe some of our other adversaries. Russia in particular, it could induce fear that maybe more color revolutions will insinuate, which was the impetus for the fall of the former Ukrainian president who was friendly to Russia. Putin may clamp down even more on the media, the freedom of the press, which I don't know how much more he could than he has done now. But this could include harsher punishments and maybe more human rights violations. It's clear to me that, we are not keeping pace in the information war, and I think it's only going to become more important as we move forward to understand the importance of this digital terrain. And I feel like the longer we wait to implement not just a working solution, but an effective solution, the more disinformation is going to continue to sow division within our society. I was just talking with my class before I came over here, digital literacy, that's a huge thing. And one of my classmates mentioned that, in countries in Scandinavia, they don't have necessarily the same issues with digital literacy because they actually, from a young age, talk about media literacy to children in schools. That's something that may take a few decades. I mean, people are understanding the disinformation is out there, right? But I think people still, by and large, fall victim to it. And so educating our society on this is not going to be something that happens overnight. So we need a more effective solution today, so we don't have more erosion within our society. more polarization and unhealthy dosage. A little polarization can sometimes be good, but an unhealthy dosage certainly is not. And I want to be clear too, disinformation has not led directly to the erosion of democracy, but the two are intertwined and appear to be positively correlated. And it's interesting, in my defense, my mentor, Dr. Flynn, brought up a very good question to me. And he said, how's Russia doing now on disinformation? Not so great, you know. Ukraine is doing a really good job. And I think maybe we, as a society, we should look at all the actors that are kind of playing a part right now. You know, you have the current administration doing things akin to the Reagan administration, which is they have intelligence and they're deciding, hey, what do I declassify to debunk Russian disinformation?
Exactly.
You know, and I think you know, the last speaker mentioned anonymous. You know, I don't know all the actors out there right now that are debunking Russian disinformation. And so maybe we should look at this. Maybe we should look and see what kind of mix of folks are doing this, albeit not in collaboration with each other. It's kind of piecemeal, right? But if we do kind of maybe take, you know, some of what's happening out there and maybe stand up a National Office for Information where we have that collaborative effort, that could be potentially very powerful.
Agreed.
You know, that's really all I have for now, sir.
Okay. Wow. No, that was really good. So one of the first questions I have is, as the Marine Corps seeks to build our chops, right? We talked about training at the lower level that needs to be bolstered, but we do have the MEF information group standing up and building their capabilities. And in the last couple of years, I've seen the curve, I think, start to increase as they build it. They understand what their mission is, what particular capabilities they need through experimentation, and now, especially I think for 3 MiGs, my understanding is they're actually developing operational capability and chops out there. Have you seen any evidence of them interacting with a GEC or some sort of similar capability? Because I think you said the resources that they bring would marry well with what the MiG and the MEFs are trying to do in their particular AOs.
Yes, sir. I have not seen evidence of that. And actually, when I was writing my thesis, I did reach out to one of my instructors who is from Marine Intelligence Officer course, or MACTF Intelligence Officer course, and spoke with him about that. You know, spoke with him about the GEC. You know, not necessarily, you know, are we plugging in with them? But we did talk a little bit about it, and in my research, I haven't found that we have. But I do agree with you that would be, I think that would be pertinent to have an LNO from our service IOs to be plugged into this infrastructure.
Yeah, it sounds like they can provide a lot of valuable resources and potential other avenues for ISR.
Yes, sir.
Collection.
And again, if I would have had more time with this thesis, it would have been great to dive down into, you know, how the Fleet Marine Force really could plug into this. I just focus more so on the national level.
Okay.
But if I did have more time, I think it would be good to really look at that and how that relationship could, you know, benefit. So.
I agree. I like the conclusions and the recommendation, right, for national level. More resources, which is obviously challenging to get someone to commit to that, but I agree. And more people are discussing how significant this is, and to your point and your evidence that we are lagging compared to others. Okay. I'll open it up to questions from the virtual audience or the live audience here. Benny?
And you were looking at the hypothetical national office for information. Do you consider or put in anything about the connections to the Hollywood, ones that are owned by the Chinese, streaming services, anything like that, in order to produce, you can call it like ambient information to create a positive impression of America without being overtly, this government says this sort of thing?
So the question for the virtual audience was the use of Hollywood or other type production studios, really, or other influence capabilities, cultural services to try and support our efforts at influence.
I did not even think about that. And it's actually, you know, going back to my point, which I had on the slide, is, you know, doing this needs to be a calibrated effort. We have to strike a good balance doing this because, like I said, it could evoke fears that we're ramping up our information warfare to directly target actors such as Russia. So, I think if we can get away from that image, I think that that's actually a very interesting solution. And I really have not considered that.
That's
a good
actually
point.
a very interesting
Very
topic
interesting.
for
Yes,
next
sir.
year students to try and tackle. It may be a good recommendation for the faculty. And we've got a couple of questions from the virtual audience. So if you would like to unmute yourself, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, Emily, great stuff. Question to tie together some of the things we've been studying. Viability of post-disinformation debunking versus, I don't know if the right term, but pre-bunking. Before the disinformation hits the street, kind of what's been going on, and you mentioned a little bit of it, but getting ahead of what disinformation is coming, and allowing the individual to know that it's disinformation, so you're not having to undo the coherence that's already generated in their head. Because there's a lot of literature out there and research that points to once coherence is established, even if they know it's based off of bad information, you're pushing a rock up a hill. So thoughts on that and what we learned. Ukraine came post study for you, but I'd be interested in your synthesis on that idea.
Yes, sir. I think I do think I understand what you're asking. Obviously, it would be great if we could really prepare to combat disinformation that we feel is going to come down the line based off of our actions. Real quick, I will mention I did have a quick Q&A session with the ambassador to Norway, and she told me that within the Norwegian society, they actually do a very good job making their society aware of disinformation, debunking disinformation, because they tell their people, hey, this is what's out there. This is probably what's to come. And so they're aware. It's easy though in their society, they're more of a homogenous society. They don't have the same polarization that we do. So, sir, to answer your question, if we could kind of model, I guess, Norway, our society, right? Trying to get ahead of disinformation, so we're not pushing that rock up the hill. That would be great, but of course we have a lot of challenges that we face to try to get after that. But I do think that obviously we're reporting on the situation, various news outlets daily on the current Russia-Ukraine situation. And do I think it's pertinent that maybe we have a capability within this organization to really predict, hey, when we do this, this is what we expect, or when Ukraine does this, obviously we'd have to be tied into what it is they're doing. We think this is going to be the ramification. We think that this is going to be the disinformation, and really getting ahead of that. I do think that there would be a lot of validity to that, and it could certainly be extremely helpful. I don't know if that answers your question, sir.
I think to pull on that a little bit, I think your example of Ukraine, sir, I think is an example of what that might look like. And that may be a good case study for future groups to see how did the US, because I think they effectively did that, right? So they started to identify the troop movements, and they even started to identify some of the potential actions that could be used as an excuse to send forces in. So they highlighted that to the international community, and it made it much harder for them to use that, even though Russia still tried, but it made it really undercut the validity of their argument by identifying their likely courses of action. So I think it may be good for a future study to see if we can identify how they came to that. Was there some sort of center or team that actually helped give analysis and provide those recommendations to do that? But maybe that becomes the justification for investing in your capability that you're recommending.
Yes, sir.
I have a question, chat.
All right.
It's from Travis Reese. How does not having a single organization responsible for the I in the EIME9 complicate our integration with the GEC to leverage our part of public diplomacy?
So if I understand the question right, they're saying is it best if, or what would be the drawback of just having one organization that does this? I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand the question.
Read it again, please.
How does not having a single organization responsible for the I in DIME complicate our integration with the GEC to leverage our part of public diplomacy?
So basically, I think not your recommendation to have a single organization responsible for that. How does that make it challenging to coordinate? Whereas for the military, for the diplomatic, and for the economic, there's usually some sort of agency that's the lead for coordinating those efforts. I think you kind of that was the point of trying to explain it. But do you have any other thoughts on how that complicates?
Having a single organization.
Yeah, how that complicates not having an organization.
That's a very good question. And again, if I'm understanding it right, I think having all the applicable actors under one umbrella, a permanent solution. And again, sir, please interject if I'm not answering this question correctly, but I don't see how, I guess I don't understand how that would complicate things. I think it would more.
It would actually help
streamline, help things, but.
I mean, I think we see how it makes various efforts. It's hard to apply towards a particular set of priorities, right? So if you have one entity that's actually setting the priorities for the nation, it's much easier to apply resources, whether that's commercial industry or governmental or military information related capabilities or whatever we're calling that thing in the future. So, Travis, does that get after your question, or do we need to rephrase that?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And so, for example, like the last podcast for Cognitive Crucible actually had this discussion where if you take all the elements of DIME and you were to say, all right, is there an entity that is responsible for the D, M, and E? The answer would be yes. For the I, it's not. And so GEC specifically, being an extension of public diplomacy, is really one of those cases where you've got a small M contribution. So, per your experience out, with 3MEG and others, you're looking at a situation where in many instances, we're not doing military information specific campaigns or leading. We're trying to integrate with the GEC and others. And so trying to actually add to someone else's message through some of our OAIs is a critical part of how we potentially shape that. So when you look at this position where you don't have an organization that's responsible for the I, that everybody's kind of taking a bite at this apple, and particularly even inside of the Marine Corps, and you're talking specifically about GEC providing an advantage here in terms of leading this messaging in sort of a day-to-day environment. How do you see specifically from your particular paper how that lack of that organization that not only integrates with the state, but actually leads the I, potentially complicates how we participate or reinforce as a Marine Corps out doing day-to-day competition, our contributions to narrative information effects. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I think having an organization akin to the NOI to really lead the effort, though it may, I guess it could complicate that relationship. I haven't really thought about it, but that's why I feel like it'd be pertinent to have DoD service IOs plugged into that organization. And, but I haven't really, I kept this more at a national level, and I haven't really, I didn't really do a deep dive into any of the services. But I do think that relationship, if you have someone like the NOI leading the effort, I think it's incredibly important to have that relationship with the DoD service IOs. So that way you're not, stepping on each other's toes, but you're complementing each other.
Theoretically,
yeah.
So to add to that, I will counter that even with other national elements of the DM&E, I think we still see various stray voltage come out, and we struggle to get a whole of government solution to prioritize. But I think that, to your point, the cost of not having one, especially as this capability becomes more and more capable of getting what after national interests, right? I think we've always used information and influence to try and achieve national aims, but we've never really had anyone other than the president, right, and the National Security Council to try and direct where we want that to go. But having one person or one organization identified to help craft that and integrate that into the national requirements, I think is about time.
Yeah, and to go along with that, actually, I was having a discussion with my second reader, and obviously the capabilities exist to counter disinformation, right? And many different sectors of the government, society, DoD. So, it's not necessarily that, that the GEC can't do it, right? Or NSA can't do it, or CIA, or DoD service IOs. But it's more about trying to bring all those players together and the collaboration, the coordination. And that's the biggest piece, I think, that is missing, is that the capability exists. It's just a matter of coordinating that capability.
Harnessing and collaborating, deconflicting as well.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. All right. Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, sorry, just a follow up for you too. In the chat, I put a point of contact over. So the GEC actually just hired a new deputy director for analytics and research. Mr. Dan Owens just retired from the Coast Guard, actually, and also prior Marine. And so I put his contact information in there, and certainly not to override Colonel Tippett's authority over your time. But I think that he would definitely be interested in receiving this brief. This is the kind of thing that he's interested in too, as well. So just for your attention, if you did get a chance to see the chat for later.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right. So where to next for you?
How
are you going to continue this research in your next position?
Sir, I will be with the Marine Innovation Unit. I will be the Human Systems and Synthetic Biology Manager for the Commercial Engagement Branch.
Okay. So there's potential then to continue.
Yes, sir. There is a potential. So my focus might be different. Again, this information is not really in my wheelhouse. I'm a SIGINT officer, and then in my day job I do MS research. But I was just very passionate about this topic, and I'm really hoping I would love to have the opportunity to be a part of this innovation of something like this. So, as Travis said, there's a contact in there, and maybe what I said has value.
Yes, it does.
So we'll see.
Continue the forward progression towards knowledge sharing. So good.
Sir.
Okay. And with that, we will wrap up the student presentations for Innovation Summit 2022. Excellent topic to wrap it up on. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Emily.
Education is what's important. Training, preparation for the expected. Education, preparation for the unexpected.